You're listening to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast, episode 231. Welcome to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. I'm your host, Paula Price, lawyer turned certified executive coach. This podcast was created to empower women lawyers just like you to create a life and practice you love. Join me every week for a break from the hustle so we can focus on you, what you truly want, and how you can create it. If you're over the overwhelm, done with putting out fires, and ready to redefine success on your own terms, you're in the right place. Ready for today's episode? Let's dive in. Are you ready to save some time? I think so. I know for myself and for many of you, you probably wish sometimes that you had more hours in the day. And as far as I know, we're not there yet. We're all working on a 24-hour schedule. So until we're able to find a way to expand the amount of time we have at our disposal, the next best thing is to find ways where we can save time, ways to do things more efficiently so that we can get more done in less time and hopefully use the extra time to do something a little bit fun or at least productive. So before we dive in, I just wanted to reconnect with all of you because I feel like this period of the year, we are mid-October, is, at least for me, a little bit of a breathing space. I'm anticipating about a week of quieter time, which I'm super grateful for. We've had a very busy stretch in our household. My kids both started school in September. My son started at a new school. I've been really busy with work in the most wonderful ways and lots of stuff going on family-wise, and that's a good thing. It also means that my time has been highly regimented since about the end of August, and so I've got a couple of weeks coming up that are a bit less structured, where I have a bit more breathing space in my calendar, and I'm going to use that time to recalibrate, to rest up a little bit, to get organized. And for you, I hope wherever you are in your life that you have that too, that you've got a chance to reconnect with yourself, to kind of realign and make sure that you are on track with your goals and to maybe have some space just to tidy up, whatever that looks like for you. I will literally be tidying up around here at home. And I'll also be thinking about what I want for the rest of the year and what I want for next year. That's coming up to 2026. So welcome. As we go through today's episode, I will share 3 strategies. They're easy to implement and relatively high impact for the level of effort that is required. I'm choosing these 3 tips. There are many more that I could pick from, but I'm choosing them because to me, they are high impact and relatively easy to implement. And if you can make them part of your practice, you will notice that you're able to be more efficient without having to make any major adjustments to your life. As we go through the episode, as always, I encourage you to think about what resonates with you most and apply those things. Think about how you could implement what we're talking about in your practice. The goal, of course, is to make your life easier, to help you use your time more productively. So with that, we are going to dive in to 3 quick tips to help you save time. So the first tip is I'm going to encourage you to start thinking about hours of the day that are currently not that popular that you might start using to do things. Now, the reason for this is that there are pockets of the day where it's going to take you longer to do a task, a chore, a thing than it would take in other periods of time. For example, if you commute to an office, chances are there's a period in the morning where there's a lot of traffic. And if you take transit or if you drive, you're going to spend more time in a vehicle than you would if you left at a different time of day, whether that's leaving earlier, which is probably the direction I would go in, or if you leave a little bit later. So the time spent is reduced because of the time of day that you choose to do it. Coffee is a similar analogy. So many moons ago, I used to work at Starbucks. I was a barista, and I noticed, as most baristas will probably tell you, that there are pockets of the day where a coffee shop is really busy and pockets of the day where it's very quiet. during the quiet times, you're standing there waiting for people to come in through the door. Those people get served relatively quickly. You might even have a little chat, who knows? And there are times of day where there are plenty of people in the store. They're all lined up. They're all waiting. Coffee takes longer. Chances are you're not having those friendly chit chats. You're just moving one person to the next. And so if you show up for a cup of coffee at peak hours, chances are you're going to be waiting a lot longer than if you go in non-peak hours. So if you take this and you apply it more broadly to the way that you structure your day, what you might find is that you are able to save time simply by shifting when you do certain activities. So for example, back when I used to practice law and I worked at a law firm, I would go in early. This was in the pre-hybrid days, and being in the office was the routine. So this might be a little bit different for you if you're not working in an office or you're working hybrid or whatever your structure might be. But if there is a commute involved, you might think about, okay, if you are spending a lot of time in traffic, can you adjust the timing so that you're there earlier? And that's what I used to do. I used to plan to get to the office probably an hour and a half before most other people. And my commute time would be a fraction of what it would be if I waited till later in the morning. Now, I recognize that if you have young kids at home, you may be on their schedule. You might be required to time your arrival at the office to accommodate their daycare hours or nanny hours or school hours. So I get it. And maybe there's some flexibility there with your partner. But if you can find ways to start capitalizing on those non-peak hours, you will literally save yourself time. So again, going back to the morning, if you think about, and you'll probably notice there's a bit of a theme. I'm definitely a morning person. We're going to talk a little bit more about energy, and that will come up again. But you might notice that if you get to the office early, it's quieter to get there. When you arrive, there are fewer people. So maybe there are fewer distractions for you. Fewer emails have started to arrive in your inbox. You might find that you're able to use that time more effectively because there's less going on around you. You might find the same thing in the evenings. So for example, if you are the kind of person that likes to arrive later in the day, but you also work later in the day, you might notice that it's a little bit faster for you to get things done because there are fewer distractions or emails or interruptions. Other examples of how you might capitalize on non-peak hours. If you have site visits where you're meeting with clients and that's part of how you practice, you might think about how you can time those so that you're not hitting up against peak traffic hours. I've had lawyers who were concerned about that. What do I do if I need to meet a client and you can't do it on Zoom? Can you schedule those meetings to take place when it's lower traffic? So we can figure out what those times are so that you can plan it strategically. Other examples, if you have lunch dates, right? Or you have a regular practice of leaving your office to grab lunch every day. I used to grab my lunch at around 11:30, 11:45, because that way I could miss the large lineup. So again, just like the coffee shop example, if you can adjust your time frame just a little bit, you might find that it takes less time for you to do things because you're not lining up with everybody else trying to do it all at the same time. So for this tip number 1, the questions I have for you are, where do you notice currently that you are spending time in a lineup or in traffic, or simply waiting for something? And can you, and maybe the answer is no, can you change the timing such that you reduce the amount of time that is required for that specific task? Other question that I would invite you to consider is, are there hours in the day, sort of the imperfect hours that nobody else seems to want, that you could start to use that would be productive for you? So this is kind of a part 2 of this point, that there are times of day where other people simply don't want to engage, and so the activity takes less time. It can also free up opportunities for you to do things. And the example that I will share here is a personal one, where nobody in my household is very interested in the time slot that occurs at 5 a.m. Now, more than a couple of years ago, I started to use the 5 a.m. time slot to get up early and exercise and work before my kids got up. Now, this year, so just in the last few months, I've shifted that a little bit. I'm no longer getting up quite as early. And that's because my household is going to bed later, and so I am too, and a 5 a.m. start isn't working as well for me anymore because I can't go to bed as early as I used to. So I'm adjusting my morning window. But for many years, that really early time slot was a highly productive time for me because nobody else wanted that time slot. So I could step in and take it. Again, I appreciate that if you have kids that are younger than mine were at the time, if they're newborn or a year or two old, then you might struggle with that because they might be waking you up at night. And so that might not be an option, but it might work really well in your schedule to start using off hours to do things that you want to do that you otherwise wouldn't be able to do because you simply can't make time once your day is up and running, once the hustle and bustle has set in. So tip number 1 is to use the off hours to do things that will take less time because nobody else is doing them at that time or very few people are, and to capitalize on the fact that this is time that nobody else is really asking you to be somewhere, or you're not in conflict. If you get up really early to exercise, you're not then figuring out, okay, are my kids looked after, or is there something else I need to be doing right now? Is there an email I need to respond to? It's like no man's land time. Like you get to be enjoying that time without the pressure of feeling like you need to be responsive or doing something else. So as we go through these tips, I also encourage you to think about how you can mix them up, how you can combine them and leverage them off each other, because that's when you start seeing even greater time savings. So tip number 1. Now, moving on to tip number 2. This is something I'm sure I've talked about this on the podcast before. And P.S. If time management is something you're interested in, I do have a roadmap of the podcast episodes that I've recorded, most of them about time management. And by most of them, I mean, I believe there are episodes that I've recorded since creating the roadmap, so I'll need to update it at some point. But about 26 episodes of this podcast have been summarized in that roadmap. So if you want to download it, there's a link to it along with the notes that go with this podcast episode. You can see all of the episodes about time management. You'll find there's a lot of material there that can support you and help you in figuring out how you want to manage and structure your time. So just a side note there. Now, getting back to tip number 2, maximize your high energy windows. This is a concept that I talk about often with my clients. It is a game changer. The idea here is that each of you has a chronotype or a time of day where your energy levels are better than they are at other times of day. So you might think of yourself as a morning person. You're the kind of person who wakes up and you're alert, your brain is functioning on all cylinders, you think more clearly, you are more effective, you make better decisions. For some of you, it's the opposite. You wake up and you're in a fog, but by 10 a.m., 11 a.m., you start to warm up, and by mid-afternoon, you hit your stride, and you're firing on all cylinders, and that's where you have your best thinking time, you're efficient. For a morning person, that might be exactly the time where your brain starts to shut down. That's for sure where mine does. I am definitely a morning person. I don't know if I always have been or if I've just trained myself to be a morning person, but certainly since learning of this concept, I've learned that I am definitely a morning person. I get up early. My brain works really well in the morning. By the time I hit 2 or 3 in the afternoon, it's not cooperating as much. And by the evening time, I just want to be a vegetable. I don't want to be thinking too hard about anything. And so what you want to do is figure out when you have your best capacity, especially mentally with the work that you're doing as a lawyer, when is your best time mentally? So I learned of this concept when I was in coaching school, and I can't remember the exact source of it, but I started to notice immediately things that I was doing at the time that were not aligned with my energy levels. So for example, as I mentioned, I'm a morning person. I noticed that one of the habits I'd started in that time zone was unloading the dishwasher first thing in the morning. Now, there was a reason for that. I had young kids. I had a nanny who'd come into the house for a nanny share for my daughter, and I didn't want her to have to deal with my dishwasher, and so I would clear it first thing in the morning. And I realized that I was using my very valuable brain time to unload the dishwasher. And I decided that no, this was not an effective use of my brain power. I should be unloading the dishwasher when I don't really need brain power because it doesn't take me a lot of mental effort to do that. What I also noticed around that time period was that I was staying up after the kids had gone to bed to work. I was working on my coaching certification. I was working as a legal research lawyer. And so I was trying to do that at 9:30, 10 o'clock at night after the kids went to bed. And what I noticed was that I was very slow. It took me a long time to do anything. I was easily distracted and getting up every 2 minutes to grab something sweet just to re-energize my brain. And I decided that it wasn't really working. And so what I did was I flipped things around. I decided that I would go to sleep when my kids went to sleep. So at that time, it was probably around 9 in the evening. And I would wake up really early, around 5 a.m. And I can't remember how the routine eventually formed itself, but it became a routine where I would wake up early, go for a walk or a run or whatever, and then I would do my work. And I would usually be able to get in 1 to 2 hours of deep work before I had to face the day. So is that right? So I'm just doing the mental math right now. And it's probably maybe an hour. Anyway, it doesn't matter. The point is I was able to do focused work early in the morning at a time slot where previously I'd been unloading the dishwasher. And conversely, in the evening where I didn't have so much brain capacity, maybe I was in the middle of making dinner for my kids, then I could unload the dishwasher. Or after dinner, I could unload the dishwasher. They're clean, nothing bad's going to happen. They just need to be unloaded at a time where I'm not using high value, precious mental energy to do those tasks. So for you, what you want to think about is, what would this look like if you were to apply this in a workday? What are the times of day where you have your best energy? And if it's in the morning, like me, and maybe you have a slump in the afternoon, then you want to start thinking about planning your day around your energy levels. So what does that mean? Well, if morning is your peak time, let's start putting in some of your deep work. You can use that time for thinking tasks, things that are difficult, and you might use your afternoon for tasks that are less mentally challenging or tasks that energize you. So for me, I will leave emails. So responding to emails to the afternoon. It's not that I'm particularly good at doing them in the afternoon. In fact, I'm not, but I don't need as much mental energy usually to do those emails. If they become urgent because I simply don't get them done, then I'll move them into the morning window, because then I know I'll be able to deal with them relatively quickly, and it costs me that high value time to get them done. So I'm incentivized to do them more efficiently. Afternoon tasks for me, meetings. I love putting meetings in the afternoon because meetings typically will energize me. When I'm talking to another person, I will gain more energy as opposed to lose energy. So it's a good time for me to schedule meetings. And then you might also think about energy and tasks, where if you're in a task and you feel really motivated and energized to do that task in the moment, sometimes I think it's good to just do that task, even if you had something else planned on your calendar. Now, you don't want to push off urgent and important tasks in favor of something that you feel like doing just because. If there's something that's going to suffer as a result of you changing your path and following the thing that is most interesting to you, then you might want to think before doing that. But sometimes I will find I'm inspired to do something, whether it's planning a talk that I'm giving or writing something that is important and requires creative energy and focus. If I find I'm minded to do it in the moment, I will follow that instinct and I will get the ideas out because I do it so much faster because I'm so engaged in it. And I don't want to lose that. And so for you, you might find that you get into drafting, and once you're in that task, it's really compelling to you and you see how all the pieces fit together. And maybe you've got something else on your plate that you know that you need to do at some point, but you might push that off because you know that you can finish the task that you're in more efficiently if you keep doing it relative to switching around. So again, you're just mindful of your energy levels and following where you have your best energy. So for you, ask yourself, when do you have your best energy? Is it in the morning? Is it in the afternoon? Maybe you're one of those people that gets a fresh dose of brain power in the evening. And so maybe you want to incorporate some of that into your schedule. And then think about the tasks that would fit best into those windows. So if you think about deep work, what does that look like for you? Is it drafting? Is it sending an opinion or writing an opinion for a client? Is it organizing the structure of how a file is going to unfold? You're planning the steps of a trial, what needs to get done when, who's going to do it. So think about what tasks require the most of you mentally, and that you might think of as your deep work, and schedule that into the windows where you're most able to do that work efficiently. You might also think about what tasks are routine for you. So emails and time entries are typical routine tasks for lawyers. You know that at some point in the day, you will need time to review and respond to emails. And so if you were to think about your energy levels, what are the optimal times for you to put those pockets into your day? What kind of work energizes you? So if you know that there's work that you could do no matter what, it doesn't matter the time of day, maybe that becomes work that you put into your lower energy windows, because you know that even if you're low energy, you'll muster up the energy you need to do that work. Again, I said for me, that was meetings. For you, it might be something else. It might also be meetings. And then you want to notice, are you using high energy windows right now for low energy tasks? So if you're a morning person, for example, and you arrive at the office and the first thing you do is check your email, maybe look at the news, maybe you've got a practice of having coffee with one of your colleagues and you leave the office for that, you walk around the block, and next thing you know, your morning hours are kind of gone, they're behind you, you haven't used that time for deep work, then you may be missing out on opportunities to leverage that time. So another approach for you might be to start your morning strong. Maybe you get in early to avoid the traffic, or earlier to have more time at the office where you're not distracted. Capitalize on that work, and then you can still do the coffee or the meeting with your colleague, but maybe that gets scheduled to a time of day where you have a lower natural energy and it becomes energizing. And in a perfect world, we all have the same energy levels at all times. That's unlikely to be the case for all people, but hopefully that works for you and it works for your colleague to move that coffee date from first thing in the morning to sometime in the afternoon. So again, you want to be thinking about your schedule, what you're currently doing, and are there opportunities for you to stop using high energy time for low energy work? And conversely, are you trying to do high energy tasks at a low energy period? So if you're a morning person and you typically save your drafting for after lunch, maybe what you're doing there is actually not giving yourself the best chance at success, because by that time you're tired and you're trying to sit down and draft and it's complicated and you get frustrated. And so you push the task off to some other time. Whereas if you were to bring that same task into the morning, you might have a much more energized and efficient way of dealing with that project. So you want to make sure that you're matching up your high energy work to those high energy time slots, and those lower energy windows are being used for that lower energy work. And for each of you, I think the best thing to do is to experiment, to try matching different tasks with different energy levels. I think if this is a new concept for you and it's the first time you're hearing it, that's brilliant for you. I think this just will open up so many opportunities for you to now think about the tasks that you do, and even to notice, okay, what is a deep work task for you? What requires a lot of mental energy? What tasks require less mental energy? Which ones do you struggle with more? What times of day do you struggle more to get things done? And when you start to notice, then you can start to match your tasks and your energy levels. For me, it has made such a world of difference, and it's a process that I continue to apply and refine, and I absolutely swear by it. It has made a huge difference for me. The other thing I want to say here is that it, like all of these tips, it is not black and white. It cannot be 100% rigid, because that's just not practical. There will be days where someone else schedules a meeting and it's in your high energy time slot and you would have preferred to put it in a low energy time slot. That's fine. This is going to happen. You don't always get to do it exactly perfectly, but the idea here is at least to notionally have in your mind where you're going to ideally place things. And the more you can do that, and the more you test and try and experiment, the more you're going to notice that you're getting more done in seemingly and likely less time, because you're doing it more efficiently. So if we go back to that first tip, right? This idea of let's leverage the downtime and do things at a time of day where it takes less time to do them. Great, we've got that, and we're starting to apply that where you can. Then we take this second layer, we look at your energy levels, and we start to think about, in a perfect world, where would we put your harder tasks? And if you're like me in the morning is a good time slot for you, you've already leveraged so much. If you can start your day early and you've got your best brain, you can get so much done by lunchtime. And you might even be pushing your lunchtime back. That's something that I notice I'm doing increasingly. I've done it before. I used to do that as a lawyer sometimes if I was really intently working on something, but I find, the more I get done before lunch, the better my day feels. And so you might find that worked well for you as well. You're creating efficiencies, you're getting things done. Or you might find you're an afternoon person, and by giving yourself all your routine tasks in the morning, you get them out of the way, and then you've got this clear slate ahead of you by the time you get warmed up, and then you've got this wonderful pocket in the afternoon. So it'll depend on your practice. It'll depend on when emails come in, when traffic is heavy, when all the things happen in your day, which will be different from my day. Again, I'm using myself as an example here, but the more you're tailoring your energy and you're tailoring your schedule, the more efficient you're going to be with the time that you have. So again, we're not adding more hours to your day, but we're using the hours that you have more efficiently. So that brings us to tip number 3, and that is to maximize your habits and minimize decisions. What I want you to think about here is that habits are extremely powerful. Charles Duhigg writes a book called The Power of Habit, and if you haven't read it, I do recommend it. The thing with habits is, overall, it is a reflection of your brain's desire to be efficient. The things that you do repeatedly become programmed to second nature. And if you think about the way that you drive to work, or the way that you walk to your children's school, or the way that if you do your grocery shopping, I do, there's a routine. I start and I follow a path, and it's always the same. And always. Sometimes I only have one thing I'm buying. But if it's a weekend and I'm doing a weekly shop, it always looks the same. If you brush your teeth, it kind of always looks the same. If you have meals that you cook on repeat, it looks the same. There are patterns and habits that you do where it becomes unconscious. If you drive standard, I do, and I don't notice it because it's so deeply ingrained in my wiring. It's just a habit. It's who I have become. It's who I am. You have habits that are you. So you want to leverage the good habits. Now, of course, we have habits we love. We have habits we don't love. The point today is to focus on the habits that are going to be ones that you want, habits that you keep, that are going to make it easier for you to go through your day. You're not making fresh decisions. You're simply following a habit. Now, the opposite is true of decisions. Making decisions burns energy. So every time you use your brain to make a decision, you're burning your brain power. Now, this is not a bad thing. We do want to make decisions, but we also want to be mindful of the decisions that you are making. And I heard recently, I mentioned this in the podcast the other week, Daniel Levitin was giving a Google talk, and it's on YouTube. And he stated in that talk that decisions burn the same amount of brain fuel, regardless of the significance of the decision, which just struck me as wild. But assuming that that is the case, it means that if you're deciding what to wear, you're using up brain fuel that could equally be used to deciding how to advise a client on a really thorny issue. And would you rather have full batteries to make the latter decision, or would you like to spend that energy deciding what you're wearing or eating or something that you could make more into a habit or routine? And for me, for sure, I'm always going to pick the more high-level decision. I'd much rather make routine decisions that to me can be made once and that's enough. So if you think about your life, when you think about your habits and routines and the decisions that you're making day to day, how can you reduce the number of decisions that you need to make in a given day so that you're saving your brain power, your decision-making fuel for bigger and more interesting decisions? So we've already talked a little bit about making decisions. If you are, for example, choosing to use a certain time of day, already that's a decision. You know that you're going to get to work at a certain time. You're not waking up in the morning and asking yourself, should I go to work at 7 today or should I go to work at 10? Maybe you've decided I'm going to leave the house at 7. Or if we look at the second example of energy, if you already know in your mind where your high level energy times are, where your low energy times are, and you know which tasks belong where, already you've facilitated your decision making because you're not going to be thinking, well, should I draft the argument at 3 today or should I draft it at 10? You're already going to have a default that if you are making a choice and you have the liberty to do that, you don't have a meeting that is scheduled at 10, you will default to that option where you get to maximize the time that you're spending on deep work by using your high energy window. So already we've started to put structures in place. If you're following these suggestions that are minimizing the number of decisions that you need to make. So how can we do this in a workday? How do you minimize the number of decisions? If we look at work, what I recommend is to have a very sort of formulaic approach to your workday. And it's not hard and it's not as constricting as it may sound. Once you start doing it, again, it becomes a habit and then it becomes so much easier. So, for example, if you look at your workday, you might have a certain formula that you follow. I know I do, and it makes my days feel very consistent. It helps me to identify what needs to get done and then to do it. So maybe your day starts by planning your day. You sit down, you look at your list of things that you need to do, and you start planning. What is today going to look like? What is today, going to look like? I recommend having anchors in your day. So if you look at what a day at the office or at your home office looks like, chances are there's a start and a finish. There's at least 2 anchors or things that you know are certain to happen during the day. And then you're planning within that framework. So maybe you have focus time in the morning. Maybe you take a lunch break. I can't think of an example in recent time where I haven't taken a lunch break. I really do value that time, especially because my mornings typically are intense. I do them very intentionally. And so by the time I reach my lunch break, I feel like I would definitely benefit for some time away from my desk. Then you might think about what your afternoon tasks typically look like. So again, I mentioned already, usually I'll have lunch and then I'll turn to email and admin and all those things. And then as you get nearer to the end of your day, what kind of wrap up do you do? Is it responding to emails? Is it making sure all your time has been entered? A great practice to get into at the end of the day is to plan what you want to do the next day while your brain is fresh, while it's easy for you to identify the tasks. It's a great time to set yourself up for success the next day. So as you're thinking about your day and you're thinking about this general structure, you're minimizing the number of decisions. If you're deciding in the morning the main projects you're going to work on, you're reducing that transition time between tasks. Now, I get it. Getting back to what we said earlier, yes, you will have interruptions. Yes, things are going to happen. And so the idea isn't that you have this plan and it always is the same and you get to follow exactly what you set out to do in the morning. You are going to have interruptions. You are going to need to adapt, but you've got that structure in place. You might think about it like a backbone, like a flexible but firm backbone. And so you're not reconstructing or reinventing the wheel every day. You've got the structure in place, and the new work that comes in, the interruptions that occur, the emergencies, etc., they get absorbed into your schedule as opposed to your schedule being dictated by the external distractions that fly at you every single day. Now, you also want to be thinking about when you're creating the idea of a plan for your day, what can you expect to happen? You might expect that you're going to get emails. You might expect that you're going to get interruptions, and maybe you're able to carve into your day time that is allocated to dealing simply with things that either come up in the moment or tasks that you know you have on your plate that aren't necessarily urgent, but if you've got some extra flex time in your day, those are the tasks that you're going to turn to. Now, if your practice allows for it, you might also think about daily themes. So my practice has evolved to the point where I can have themes for each day, and notionally those themes, just to give you an example, yours will be different, but just to give you an example about how I think about it, is a Monday is typically that morning is reserved for admin. That's where I get organized for the week, where I think about what's happening. I try to get on top of emails, etc. And the afternoon is reserved for coaching appointments. Tuesdays, I typically allocate to webinar work that I do in terms of organizing, drafting, having webinars. That is my Tuesday. And if possible, or if my calendar allows for it, I should say, then I might have more appointments, coaching appointments scheduled in the afternoon. Wednesdays are the day I record my podcast. So that's what I'm doing today. It's Wednesday morning. It's usually the first thing that I do on a Wednesday because it's important and the deadline is Wednesday. So that is typical. And then I write my newsletter and I have my group coaching calls on Wednesdays, typically. And then admin in the afternoon. I'll have usually a later lunch on a Wednesday, and then I'll do admin, then kid stuff, etc. Thursdays are primarily appointments, coaching appointments, same with Fridays. Or if I'm preparing for a talk that I'm giving, then often Thursdays, Fridays, I'll block time off to prepare materials, slides, all the things I need to do in order for me to give a presentation. So that's roughly what every week is going to look like, and it will change. So tomorrow is Thursday. I'm going downtown to meet a friend for lunch. That's going to look a little bit different. But I have a rough structure in place so that I'm not reinventing my week every single week and trying to figure out where I'm going to put what. So for you, I get it. Your practice is going to look very different from mine, as it should. But you might start to notice that there are weekly events, and you can start to put those events into your calendar. So things that I would recommend for lawyers is to have a weekly meeting with your assistant or your team or somebody. Weekly meetings are great for staying accountable and for having a time in the day, a time in the week where you know that all those things, those questions that come up over the course of the week, you now have a time slot allocated to dealing with the ones that are not urgent. So thinking about what you might put into your week. Maybe you have a Monday morning or a Sunday night planning session with yourself. I highly recommend that so that you're looking ahead to the week, what needs to get done. Same thing Friday or whatever day you finish your work week, to have a wrap-up session with yourself to make sure you're accounting for all the things that you've done. Let's celebrate it. And let's also look ahead, kind of like the end of the day is a great time for you to plan the next day. The end of the week is a great time for you to make some notes about what needs to happen the following week, because let's say you do that on a Friday, then you've given yourself a gift for Sunday or Monday when you sit down to do your week's planning, instead of leaving it undone and then on Sunday or Monday asking yourself, wait a second, like what even happened last week? What do I need to do here? You're giving yourself a big gift. You're doing yourself a big favor. So where we started with this, and I really am getting into some detail here. So hopefully this has been helpful in the way that I intended it for it to be helpful, to give you some granularity about what it might look like when you start making decisions and establishing routines ahead of time so that you're not having to make as many in the moment. Is that we want you to have routines. We want to develop habits and routines that become second nature so that you're not having to make as many decisions. So we've talked about it in the work context. I also think that it's really helpful to do this in your non-work context. Now, what are some examples of that? Well, I am a mom of 2 kids who eat. Yours probably do too if you have them. And that's a job that I take on Monday to Thursday. My husband and I share it on weekends, or he'll take over dinners, whatever. And so that means I want to know that I have quick and easy meals that I can prep on a weekday. And so I've got my go-tos, right? I've got certain standard meals. I love the oven. The oven is my friend because I can throw things in there and magically things come out tasting really good with very little effort on my part. So what kind of meals are you preparing? If you can turn that into a routine. Now, again, it doesn't have to be so routine that it's boring, but how can you help yourself by having some go-tos? It might also mean in terms of what you're wearing. So if you have a standard wardrobe, I mean, you see so many famous people who wear the same t-shirt every day because that way they're not making more decisions. They own the same suit. They have a consistent style. That's a really great way to minimize the number of decisions that you're needing to make, or make that decision the night before. Maybe that's a late in the day brain decision versus first thing in the morning decision. So how can you reduce the number of decisions? Other examples, maybe it's decisions to see your friends and put those in the calendar so that you're not wondering, when am I going to see so-and-so? You can do that ahead of time. House stuff, maybe you've got a routine for your house. So think about for you, exercise. Do you have a certain routine that you follow in order to maintain your physical health? If so, what does that look like? If you can set yourself up so that that's easy, that's what I do. I like to go for a walk in the morning. And so I've got everything I need hanging on the door and I just grab it and go. I don't have to think about it. So how can you make it easy for yourself to do the things that you want to keep doing? And that will help you entrench these habits so that you're no longer spending your mental energy deciding, am I going to do it? When am I going to do it? Etc. Again, if you combine all of these three things, right, now you've got habits. Habits where you get up early, you're using the time of day that nobody else seems to be using, you're maximizing the windows of time where you have your best energy. This has become a routine for you. What you end up with is this really efficient way of living your life where you're maximizing and using your time efficiently. Now, if you hear all of this and it sounds too formulaic and too structured, I get it, but try it. Try one thing even just to see what it's like. And again, I don't want it to sound totally inflexible because life happens and there's going to be a need for flexibility. I know for myself, my usual planning routines have not been what I like to have. And so part of my next couple of weeks is to take a step back and to go back to some of the goals that I set earlier in the year and to ask myself, big picture, am I in alignment with where I want to be? What is missing here? How can I bring my routines more into line with what I like them to be? Because I feel like the past 6 weeks have been very intense. I've been very busy. I don't like to use that word, but there it is. I have been busy. So how can I step back and realign, reset, recalibrate so that I'm feeling more proactive and I'm feeling like, okay, I'm consciously choosing and aligning, etc. So for you, I encourage you to do the same. Figure out what works for you. Do what you can to be efficient and productive and use the time that you want to use, but also give yourself that grace of being flexible. Now, in terms of structures for you, before we wrap up for the day, this third point, routines, decisions, etc., how do you go about doing that? Well, number one is, and maybe just a few notes about why I think routines are helpful. Again, going back to this idea of the routines being a backbone, like a backbone, they're firm but flexible. It's not to trap you in a rigid schedule. The idea is to create a default, right? A default set of practices and habits so that you always know that consistently you can get done the things you want to get done, that you're not reinventing the wheel. You're not having to make decisions that you've already made. You're minimizing your decisions and transition time. And you have a sense of safety, right? If you know that you have allocated time in your day every day to deal with email, then when you see the emails come in and you review them, then if it's not an urgent email, and most of your emails probably aren't urgent, you know that you can respond to that email in the time that you have allocated at whatever time of day to respond to the email. You're not in that reactive mode where you feel like you have to respond at any moment because you know you've got that time set aside. So to establish routines for you, some questions that you can ask yourself are, what routines do you already have in place that work well for you? My guess is that you have a lot of routines that you're already doing that serve you very well. Maybe it's the way that you wake up in the morning. Maybe it's the way you start your day at the office. Maybe it's your wrap-up routine. Maybe it's your meal planning. My guess is you've already got lots of really great routines. And so what are those? And let's figure out how to amplify the routines that you have to make them even better, potentially. At the same time, I would like you to think about what routines work against you. What routines do you have that cost you that don't have a net benefit? So if I think about routines that I can fall into, sometimes it's scrolling on the internet before bed, not a routine that I want to get into because it costs me sleep, and no, the thrill of watching the reel usually doesn't make up for the feeling of fatigue the next day. Or we're in the routine of watching TV at night. I really enjoy it, but maybe we need to start being a bit more disciplined about what time we're going to bed because I've noticed I'm starting to feel like that's slipping and I'm more tired than I need to be. So maybe there's an adjustment I can make there. But I like the routine. I like the practice. I like the time with my family, but maybe it's going a little bit too late. So what practices are helpful? What practices are not so helpful? How do you want to amplify the helpful ones? How do you want to reduce the ones that aren't so helpful? And then are there routines that you would like to add? Is there something that you've heard today maybe that you've thought, oh, you know what? Like I don't have a consistent meal planning. I think that would actually be useful to just have some go-tos so I don't have to think about it so much. Maybe I'll have a list and at the beginning of the week, I can just think roughly what that's going to look like and that'll save me time. I can do my shopping, etc. I mean, I did not ever plan meals before having kids. It was not ever on my radar. It sounded boring. I would never have done it. And when my kids grow up and I'm no longer feeding them daily, then I might let that go. I mean, it's not something that I naturally gravitated to, but now that I'm here, I find it enormously helpful to sit down at the beginning of the week and to decide roughly what we're going to have. And yes, I'll change the schedule if it makes sense to do that. But I just want that decision made. I don't want to be thinking about it on a Tuesday. Oh, what are we having for dinner tonight? I want to know, okay, I know what we're having for dinner tonight. The ingredients are ready to go. I just have to throw them into the oven. So for you, maybe it's meal planning. Maybe it's wardrobe planning. Maybe it's planning social time. Maybe you sit down with your calendar, and maybe it means you're scheduling things a few weeks out. That's what I do. It's very old lady-ish, but I like it. It means that I get to see my friends and we have dates planned and I have something to look forward to. So for you, what are some of the things that you might incorporate as more habits into your day-to-day, into your overall practices? Maybe it's planning. Oh, you know what? I get to the office and I tend to jump right in. Maybe if I gave myself a 5-minute routine of just even reviewing what I hope to accomplish in the day, that would be really helpful. If I took 5 minutes at the end of the day just to review what I've accomplished and to acknowledge myself for that, and then to plan out some of the things that I want to do the next day. So again, we're thinking about how do we create routines that are helpful for you, and how do we potentially attach them to existing routines, habit stacking? How do I attach them to make them easier to implement? So for example, if you have a habit of going for lunch every day and you leave the office to do that, maybe you attach a 5-minute email checking session before you go for lunch, or a 5-minute time entry session before you go to lunch. Maybe you attach something to that existing habit that will also then become a habit. And then finally, when you're thinking about your habits, what else can you do to support yourself? Environments can really help or hinder the habits that you're trying to form. So if you're trying to form a habit, how can you make it easy? How can you set yourself up for success? And conversely, if you're trying to break a habit, do you want to do something to make it harder? I think about like if you're trying to reduce how much TV you're watching, maybe you take the remote or however you turn on your TV and you hide it, or you make it harder to reach so that you actually have to think about going and getting it as opposed to it being at your side. So just little things like that to help support you. So just to summarize, the 3 quick tips to help you save time are: number 1, to start using the times of day where things just happen faster because nobody else is doing them at that time of day. So that's tip number 1, which also in my books includes using time that nobody else wants to do the things that you would love to do, but maybe you don't always have time for. The second is let's maximize your energy. What is your peak time? What is your opposite of peak time? And how do you allocate your tasks, your thinking tasks, your lower thinking tasks? How do you allocate them to coincide with the optimal timeframes? And then tip number 3, how can you use routines to support you? And how can you minimize the number of decisions that you need to make? So those are tips where individually or combined will really help you to save time, to be more efficient with the time that you have. And so I hope that what you've heard today has really helped you see areas or specific actions that you can take that you can implement right away. So I am so glad you joined me here today. I would love to hear which of these tips was helpful for you, what you are implementing in your practice. I'd love for you to experiment this week with at least one of the tips that we talked about today and see what happens for you. You know, you can experiment, see what happens, tweak it. If you are interested in more time management, as I mentioned, there's a podcast roadmap. So go download that, see what else is available to you. And of course, if you want to implement any of these strategies and you want my help, whether it's through coaching or training, by all means, please do reach out. I would absolutely love to support you. I'd love to support you and your team. So you know where to find me. I would love to hear from you. So with that, I am going to sign off, wish you a beautiful week, and look forward to reconnecting with you again next week. Bye for now. If you enjoyed today's show and don't want to miss an episode, subscribe and follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you haven't already, please leave a rating and review. Your feedback will help me create a podcast that's tailored to your needs and goes straight to the heart of what matters to you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. If you want more information, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com. See you next week.